I thought it was just another routine business trip when I dropped my wife off at the airport heading to San Francisco. But as I was about to drive away, my 8-year-old son grabbed my hand with a trembling voice and begged me not to go home that night. He told me he knew something about Mom and pleaded with me to believe him this time. Looking into his eyes, I saw genuine fear that made me take him seriously. We decided to hide, and what unfolded next continues to haunt me to this day. It was a Thursday night at SeaTac Airport, with rain speckling my windshield as I pulled up to departures. Rebecca leaned over for a quick kiss and mentioned she had already driven her Honda there the day before for prep meetings, so I would have the family car for the weekend. She told me she loved me and disappeared through the sliding doors in her black blazer with her blonde hair pulled back, looking every bit the professional heading to San Francisco. I didn't detect any deception in that moment. Behind me in his booster seat, Ethan sat silently, his fingers twisting the straps of his dinosaur backpack. My 8-year-old son was the observant type, the kind of kid who noticed things others overlooked. I shifted into drive and merged into airport traffic, thinking this was just another Thursday night drop-off. Then Ethan grabbed my arm, not with a gentle tap, but with a grip. His small hand clamped onto my forearm hard enough to make me flinch as he insisted we couldn't go home that night. Glancing at him in the rearview mirror, I saw his face was pale and his eyes were unnaturally wide. My initial instinct was to sigh, thinking it was another worry or another shadow that wasn't really there. I was about to say something reassuring and dismissive, but his hand was shaking. He pleaded with me to believe him this time. Those 2 words cut straight through me because he had tried to warn me before. There had been a strange car parked across from our house for 3 consecutive nights, but I told him he was imagining things. He had overheard a phone call at 2 a.m, but I said it was a bad dream. I had dismissed him, patted his head, and sent him back to bed. Now he was begging me to believe him while trembling in the back seat, and I could see it in his eyes. This wasn't imagination or anxiety, but real fear. The kind that comes from knowing something bad is about to happen and no one will listen. I was coasting toward the interstate exit. Home was north, about 20 minutes to Lake City, to our house with the blue door and the maple tree, the house that was supposed to be safe. But Ethan was shaking, and I had been wrong before. As an engineer, I calculate risk for a living. In that moment, with rain drumming on the roof and my son's hand gripping my arm, the calculation was simple. The risk of believing him and being wrong meant we would waste a night. The risk of not believing him and being wrong meant something terrible could happen. The equation wasn't even close. I changed lanes and told him quietly that I believed him. Ethan exhaled shakily and desperately asked if I really meant it. I confirmed that I did and met his eyes in the mirror, apologizing for not believing him before. He nodded while blinking rapidly. I took the exit toward home, but my hands were steady now, and my mind was already problem-solving. If something was wrong, if Ethan had heard or seen something, I needed to know what we were dealing with. I had been buried in work for years, with late nights at Boeing and weekends catching up on reports, always chasing the next promotion. I had told myself I was providing for my family, but the truth was uglier. I had stopped paying attention to my own home. That was going to change. Instead of heading home to Lake City, I made a turn that changed everything. We were going home, but we weren't going inside. We sat in darkness with my truck parked beneath the shadows of 2 tall oaks across the street from our house on the quiet Lake City block. I had spent 2 years designing that house with every beam and every system, and it was supposed to be safe. Hours crawled by while Ethan dozed against the window. I watched our porch light, the blue door, and the maple tree swaying. Everything looked normal. By 11:15, I felt ridiculous. I whispered that maybe we should just go check, suggesting that maybe he had misheard. Ethan jolted awake and begged me to wait just a little longer. The desperation in his voice kept me there, but my engineer's brain was calculating probabilities and they weren't looking favorable. Then I saw headlights, or rather not headlights, but a dark shape rolling down the street with its lights off. It was a van, either black or navy, with no front plate. It crept past 2 houses, then slowed and stopped right in front of ours. My heart hammered as 2 men climbed out wearing black clothing with hoodies up and faces covered. They moved with purpose, showing no hesitation or nervous glances. These were professionals. I breathed a question about who they were, and Ethan whispered that they were the bad people Mom had talked to. They walked up our driveway like they owned it. I expected them to force the lock or smash a window and reached for my phone to call emergency services. Then one of them pulled something from his pocket. It was a key, my key. He slid it into the lock and the deadbolt turned with a soft click. They walked inside my house. My voice cracked as I asked how this was possible. There were only 3 keys, mine in the cup holder, Rebecca's supposedly in San Francisco, and the spare we kept in a lockbox in her home office. Ethan whispered that Mom had given it to them, that he had heard her say she would leave it in an envelope. My wife had given strangers a key to our home, to the house where our son slept. Flashlight beams swept through the windows in a systematic search. Then I smelled it. Something sharp and chemical. My brain cataloged it automatically as accelerant, petroleum-based, and not natural gas. Smoke curled from multiple windows at once. This was a professional job with multiple ignition points. Orange light bloomed inside, spreading fast, too fast to be accidental. The fire caught like it was meant to. Flames licked through window frames and glass shattered from the heat. The 2 men walked out calmly and unhurried, got back in the van and disappeared around the corner just as sirens wailed in the distance. Someone else had called emergency services. I fumbled for the burner phone in my glove box and dialed with shaking hands to report a fire at our address, saying it was fully engulfed. I hung up before they could ask questions. This was strategic because I wasn't ready to reveal we were alive. Fire trucks screamed up the street and firefighters jumped out pulling hoses and shouting, but I knew they couldn't save it. The house was burning too hot and too fast. 2 years of work were turning into ash. Ethan was crying with soft hitching sobs, saying he had told me. I pulled him close, pressing his face against my shoulder, and told him he had saved us and saved our lives. He had. If we had been inside sleeping, those men would have locked us in and we would have had maybe 2 minutes or less. My 8-year-old had saved us from being burned alive. As firefighters battled the flames, I made another call to someone my father had told me to trust if I ever needed real help. Attorney Margaret Hayes was my dad's friend from his union days. He had pressed her business card into my hand at his funeral 5 years ago when he was already weak from cancer. He told me to keep it and said if I ever needed someone who wouldn't back down, she was the one. From my hidden vantage point a block away, I watched my wife arrive at the scene of the destruction she had orchestrated. The rideshare pulled up just after 11:30, and Rebecca stepped out, saw the smoking ruins, and her performance began. She cried out about her family and ran toward the house with her heels clicking. A police officer caught her before she got too close, and she collapsed against him sobbing. I gripped the steering wheel with my knuckles turning white. The fire chief approached and told her they hadn't found any remains yet because the fire was extremely intense. But I saw it, the micro-expression when he said no bodies. Not grief, but fear. She was scared they hadn't found us. The chief's preliminary assessment suggested the gas system, and Rebecca's voice pitched higher as she mentioned that I had just designed it and was an engineer at Boeing. Fresh sobs followed as she was setting up her narrative, blaming my engineering. I reached for Ethan's smartwatch and typed quickly that Ethan and I had stopped for a late dinner and would be home soon. I sent the message. Rebecca's phone buzzed and she glanced down. Her face went bone white. She looked up, scanning the crowd and the shadows with wild eyes. She was no longer performing, but in pure panic. She knew we were alive. I shifted into drive and pulled away slowly with no lights. Ethan asked in a small voice why we didn't tell the police. I chose my words carefully, explaining that right now it was our word against Mom. She had an alibi and cameras had seen her at the airport. We needed proof first. I reminded him how I hadn't believed him and told him that adults make that same mistake. He asked about evidence like on television, and I confirmed exactly that. I drove to a cheap motel near the airport, paid cash, and gave the name John Smith. The room smelled like old smoke and disinfectant. Ethan collapsed onto the bed and was asleep within minutes. I sat in the bathroom with the door closed, my father's business card trembling in my hands. At 1 a.m, I dialed expecting voicemail, but she answered on the third ring introducing herself. She told me she knew who I was and that my father had told her everything, that he never trusted Rebecca and had asked her to watch over me. She told me to talk quickly. I explained everything: the fire, the arsonists, Ethan's warning, the key, hiding and watching Rebecca perform. She told me not to go to police yet because they would need hard evidence, not just testimony. She instructed me to meet her at her office the next morning. When I said I didn't have evidence yet, her voice carried certainty as she told me she knew exactly where to start: my wife's car at the airport. At 2 a.m, I left Ethan sleeping in the motel room and drove back to the airport. I wasn't going as a husband dropping off his wife, but as a man hunting evidence of murder. The parking garage was nearly empty. On level 3 in section B, I found the silver Honda quickly. I used the spare key from my work keychain, an emergency backup she had never known I kept. I unlocked the driver's door and slid inside. Her perfume hit me first, then the chemical smell, the same accelerant from the fire. I searched methodically through the glove box, console, and under the seats. My fingers touched plastic under the passenger seat. It was a burner phone. I powered it on and saw it had 15% battery and one saved contact labeled M. I opened the messages. 5 days ago, Rebecca had written that she couldn't keep living this lie and wanted to be with Marcus. M responded telling her to do it, mentioning insurance money and a fresh start. 4 days ago, Rebecca wrote that she was scared and asked what if something went wrong. M said he had found the guys, professionals, and it would look like my gas system malfunctioned. No one suspects an engineer's mistake. 3 days ago, Rebecca mentioned she got the $50,000 in cash. M called her a good girl and told her to leave the key under the back doormat, saying they would handle everything Thursday night. I kept scrolling. Rebecca asked what about Ethan. M responded calling him collateral damage and asking if she wanted a new life or not, saying they couldn't have a kid without a father. The phone slipped from my hands. She had called our son collateral damage. I opened the door and dry heaved onto the concrete. 2 days ago, M wrote about Thursday at 11 when she would be at the airport with a perfect alibi, and he would be at the gym with cameras everywhere. Thursday morning, Rebecca wrote that she loved him. M responded that he loved her too and that tonight they would be free, and by tomorrow she would be a rich widow. I forced myself to keep searching. In the glove box was a bank receipt for a $50,000 cash withdrawal from Monday with Rebecca's signature. There were life insurance documents showing $3 million for me and $500,000 for Ethan, with Rebecca Harmon as beneficiary. In the trunk were my blueprints for my gas system designed for our house, covered in red circles with Rebecca's handwriting, noting where to sabotage to make it look like an accident and blame the design flaw. I photographed everything and sent copies to a secure email, then took the physical evidence. I sat in my truck shaking. I had designed that system to keep us safe, and she had turned it into a weapon to kill us. I let myself cry for 5 minutes, then stopped and went into engineer mode. I had evidence, and now I needed a plan. Dawn broke over Seattle as I drove back to the motel. By the time Ethan woke up Friday morning, I had already met with Margaret Hayes and formed a plan that would either prove my wife's guilt or destroy what was left of my life. Her office sat in an old brick building downtown with files stacked everywhere. I spread the evidence across her desk. She studied everything in silence. When she reached the collateral damage text, she let out a low whistle. She said this was damning, but explained the problem. A defense lawyer would argue the phone was stolen, planted, or faked. My chest tightened as I asked if it wasn't enough. She said it was strong, but we needed her voice on tape confessing when she thought I was dead. Margaret smiled grimly and said that was exactly why it would work, explaining that I was going to rise from the dead. An hour later, Detective Raymond Foster walked in. He was African American, in his 50s, with salt and pepper hair. He reviewed the evidence with the expression of a man who had seen too much but refused to look away. He said quietly that in his 28 years on the force, he had seen bad things, but hiring someone to burn your own kid made him shake his head. I asked if he would help us. He stopped me firmly and said he didn't care about gender. He cared about truth. His eyes met mine as he said he had a son too, and my wife had tried to kill a child, which was evil. Something loosened in my chest. Someone believed me. Someone with a badge. Foster said we needed a confession. We needed her voice admitting she hired those men. Margaret leaned forward and suggested Saturday morning at 10 at a coffee shop on Capitol Hill. Foster nodded and said he would have cops posing as customers, while he would be in a van outside with the audio feed. I pointed out that she thought I was dead and asked why she would show up. Margaret answered that they were going to make her think the bodies were found. She typed quickly a message from a fire investigator saying they found remains in the rubble and needed to discuss identification, asking if she could meet tomorrow at 10. My stomach twisted as I asked if she thought Rebecca would come. Margaret said she would be desperate to know if I was really dead and hit send. We waited 2 heavy minutes, then her phone buzzed with a response. She would be there. Foster stood and said she had taken the bait. That afternoon, Foster taught me how to wear a wire with a body mic under my shirt. He instructed me to make her talk about the fire, mention the key, bring up Ethan, and then Marcus. I practiced with my hands shaking while Ethan watched from the motel bed asking if I would be safe. I promised I would. Saturday morning came with that crisp Seattle air, but as I walked into the coffee shop on Capitol Hill with a wire under my jacket, all I felt was the weight of what I was about to do. I arrived 15 minutes early. The cafe was crowded with Saturday regulars and espresso machines humming. Detective Foster's voice came through my hidden earpiece doing an audio check. I whispered back that I heard him. He confirmed that undercover cops were in position. I ordered coffee with shaking hands and sat at the window table Foster had specified. Foster's voice told me to breathe and that I had this. At 2 minutes past 10, the door opened and Rebecca walked in wearing a black dress with minimal makeup and her hair pulled back, playing the grieving widow. She scanned the cafe searching for fire investigator Armstrong, then her eyes found me. I watched it happen. Recognition, confusion, then shock that drained the blood from her face. She froze and someone bumped her from behind, but she didn't move. She barely whispered my name. I greeted her and asked if she was surprised to see me. She walked toward me like she was in a trance, sank into the chair, and reached for my hands while trembling. I pulled back. Her voice cracked as she mentioned the fire and said they told her nobody was there. I confirmed nobody was there because we weren't there. She asked where we were, and I told her Ethan had warned me. Our 8-year-old son had saved our lives. Her eyes went wide as she repeated his name. I explained that he had heard her on the phone Thursday morning planning something. She claimed not to know what I was talking about. I told her we saw them, 2 men who had a key to our house. I leaned forward and asked how they had our key. She suggested maybe they were burglars. I countered by asking if burglars have keys and pour accelerant through every room. She asked how I knew that, and I explained that because I'm an engineer, I know what arson smells like. There was silence as her mind spun. I pulled out folded papers and slid them across the table, printouts and screenshots of the burner phone texts, every message to M. Rebecca stared at them as her face went gray. She asked where I got these. I told her from her Honda in long-term parking. She accused me of breaking into her car, and I clarified that I used the spare key. I pointed to the texts, showing her the one about leaving the key under the doormat. I showed another about making it look like my gas system malfunctioned. My voice broke as I pointed to the one asking what about Ethan with the response of collateral damage. I looked up at her and asked how she could call our son collateral damage. She stared at the papers with no words and no denials. Then she looked up and her eyes had changed, becoming cold, calculating and empty. No more panic and no more pretending. For a long moment she just stared at the texts. Then she laughed. It was bitter and cold. When she looked up, the woman I had married was gone. Sitting across from me was a stranger wearing her face. The laugh of Rebecca echoed through the crowded cafe. She leaned forward and I saw something I had never seen before in her eyes. Complete honesty. She said I was always smarter than she thought. I asked why with my voice cracking, just to tell me why. She looked around the cafe, then leaned closer with her voice low. She said because she had been suffocating for 15 years, dying slowly in that perfect life I built. She married me because she was 28 and desperate with her biological clock screaming. I was safe, stable, and boring as hell, but safe. She thought having a child would make her happy. She laughed bitterly about the 10 years of treatments, $100,000 for a kid she never really wanted. I felt sick as she mentioned Ethan. She said Ethan was an obligation, her voice like ice, an expensive, time-consuming obligation. She played the mom but was empty inside. She said I was never there, always at Boeing, always designing something. I had married my career and she just lived in the house I bought. She asked when was the last time I really looked at her. I couldn't answer. Then she met Marcus 6 months ago at the gym, and her eyes lit up. She said he saw her, really saw her, and made her feel alive for the first time in 15 years. I asked with my voice shaking if that's why she decided to kill us. She said casually that Marcus had gambling debts, bad ones, and they needed money. Life insurance in the house totaled $4.5 million. They could start over with new names and be free. She said it was Marcus's idea initially, but she wanted it too. She talked about my gas system being perfect irony. She studied my blueprints for months and learned exactly where to sabotage to make it look like my mistake. Marcus found the professionals for $50,000 cash. She left the key under the back doormat Thursday night. My hands clenched as I brought up our son. She shrugged and asked what about him. I said he was 8 years old. She stated it was unfortunate, collateral damage. She leaned back and said she wasn't leaving him behind as a reminder of me. She claimed a quick death in his sleep beats years of therapy and resentment. Her eyes met mine as she said she was being merciful. I stood up and my chair scraped loud against the floor. I repeated the word merciful and my voice carried across the cafe. I said she was going to burn our son alive. She hissed at me to sit down because people were watching. I said I didn't care who was watching and leaned over the table, telling her to say exactly what she planned to do. Her face flushed red and she stood up, matching my anger. She said fine, and her voice rose, carrying through the suddenly quiet cafe. She stated that she hired 2 men to burn the house with me and Ethan inside. She wanted the insurance money to start a new life with Marcus. She studied my engineering to make it look like my mistake. And yes, our son had to die. That was part of the plan. The cafe was silent with everyone staring. She looked around, realizing what she had done, and sat down fast. She asked if I was recording this. I confirmed yes and opened my jacket slightly to show the wire. I asked the detective if he got that. Detective Raymond Foster walked through the cafe door with his badge raised, confirming every word. The barista dropped her apron and pulled out a badge. The guy with the laptop stood with badge in hand. The couple by the window were both cops. They surrounded Rebecca's table. Foster arrested her, listing the charges: attempted murder of 2 people, conspiracy to commit murder, arson, and insurance fraud. She accused me of setting her up and lunged for the door, but an officer blocked her path. Foster pulled out handcuffs. She screamed at me, saying we could have been happy. Foster said calmly that Marcus Lawson was in custody and was cooperating with the prosecution. She froze. I told her they picked him up that morning and that he confessed. He sold her out. She said no, he wouldn't. Foster explained it was a plea deal, 20 years instead of life. As they led her toward the door, she looked back at me one last time. Instead of anger or regret, I saw relief. She was relieved it was over, relieved she didn't have to pretend anymore. She said quietly that she hated me. I replied that I knew, and that she always did. I just didn't see it. If this true story touched you in any way, I would appreciate hearing your reflections in the comments section below. Consider following for more authentic life experiences and lessons. And please share this story with others. Someone in your network might benefit from hearing it. Your interaction helps ensure these real-life narratives reach those who need them most. Take care of yourselves out there.